and thank you for joining us on Charting the Way Forward, where we deliver research-informed strategy and intelligence from across the Democratic coalition. This podcast is produced by Way to Win. I'm your host, Kerry Eleveld, and today I am joined by
Jenifer Fernandez Ancona, Chief Strategy Officer at Way to Win.
And Dan Ancona, I'm a media consultant and strategist consulting for Way to Win.
All right. And today we have Philip Bump as our guest because he had a very interesting article he wrote recently. He's a former Washington Post columnist. I kind of refer to him as a data dude. I don't know if that's how he identifies, but I'm just attaching it to him. And author of The Aftermath, which covers the effects of the baby boomer power transfer to future generations, which I have to say, sounds very interesting, but it's not exactly why we had him on. We asked him on today to discuss a piece he wrote last week at pbump.net, which is this do you consider this a newsletter, Philip, or is it it's just where you're writing?
Yeah, I mean, I have had pbump.net for a quarter century now, and so this is, I took a hiatus of 11 years writing for the Washington Post, and I finally returned to my true love, which is pbump.net. Yes. There
you go. All right. So Philip wrote a piece that caught our attention called "The Problem is the Party," and in this piece, which he's really talking about the Democratic Party, not just the party, but we are interested in hearing your observation about that. Like, if you could just start by giving readers a basis of what you were looking at regarding the Democratic Party and some other factors.
Yeah, so basically the predicate for it was that there was new polling out from Fox News. And whenever I talk about polling from Fox News, I like to add the caveat that Fox News' polling side is different than Fox News' news side. It's very reliable. It's run by two pollsters, one that does polling for Democrats, one that does polling for Republicans. So this is reliable. I'll just put that up front because otherwise people will complain. And they'll complain anyway, but this way at least I've addressed it already. But there's new polling from Fox News. And Fox does interesting polling. They often dig into issues in a way that other people don't. And so this time there was basically an assessment of the extent to which different types of people looked at Donald Trump's presidency. And not only that, but how people looked at the two parties. And one of the things that stood out to me was the distinction between how people viewed the Democratic and Republican parties and how people felt about voting for Democrats and Republicans and how people felt about Donald Trump. And so that was the gist of the piece, was assessing that there was this difference between how people viewed the Democratic Party as such and how they felt about voting for Democrats and how they felt about Donald Trump, which I think is an important distinction that often gets overlooked as people are rushing to write these trend pieces about how the Democratic Party is on the verge of collapse.
Okay, so tell us what your conclusion was about Democrats. Like, let me frame this a little differently. There's been this contention on one side that is the Democratic Party is in terms of the brand, is at historic lows, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And then there's this contention on the other side that, well, they're at historic lows because Democrats don't like their party. And people shouldn't worry about that because Democrats will just come home in an election, right? And so we sort of believe there's something somewhere in between there. What's your but what were you looking at in terms of the distinction between the party and the candidates and where like Democratic base voters are?
Yeah, I mean, these are nuances that are hard to suss out of polling. I think it's important to acknowledge that at the front end, and that leaves open the door for interpretations depending on what it is that one, what interpretation one seeks. And I don't mean to say that people are acting in bad faith, myself included, but it can be hard to draw the distinction as cleanly as we would like. That said, I think it is clear from the polling, not only Fox News polling, but other polling, the Democratic Party as a party is viewed with broad disapproval, at times bordering on disgust. It is clear from the Fox News polling, and that I articulated in that piece, that a substantial part of that is that Democrats themselves view their own party in a not terribly favorable lens, particularly compared to Republicans. One of the things that I think was very telling about that was that when respondents were asked if their party had a clear plan for moving forward, Republicans were much, much more likely to say that their party did than were Democrats, which I think is totally valid. And one doesn't have to look very far to understand why that might be the case. That said, I do think that one of the things that's overlooked, and this does actually tie back into the book, is that the Democratic Party is much more dependent upon young people than is the Republican Party. That young people are much more likely to be politically independent, who are much less likely to be aligned with one party or the other. And as such, they don't have the sort of fealty to party and partisanship that Republicans often enjoy. And one of the things that we saw in 2024, prior to Kamala Harris becoming the party nominee, was that independents and young people really turned against Joe Biden. And part of that, I think, was that there simply wasn't the loyalty that these were long-term Democrats who were just going to support the Democratic candidate. They were instead independents, and they were just like, a pox in both houses and so on and so forth. And traditionally, such people had ended up voting for Democrats. And then last year, that simply wasn't the case. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now is that we do have that same sensibility, that people are frustrated with the Democratic Party. The young people in particular are feeling as though the party isn't doing what they would like it to do. But at the same time, these are, independents who lean toward one party, the other often do so because they dislike the other party. Independents who tend to vote for Democrats often do so because they hate Republicans, and vice versa. And as such, I think what the Democratic Party's candidates are going to enjoy next year to some extent is the fact that they are not Republicans. And I think this is part of the reason why we've seen the rise of candidates, obviously very geographically isolated, but the rise of candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Zoran Mamdani, because these are people who are not part of the Democratic Party establishment. They are instead outsiders themselves and can make a better pitch as outsiders. So that was you asked me a very narrow question. I gave you sort of my broad theory of the universe. So my apologies for getting a little far afield, but here we are.
No, it was great. I wonder, there's a lot to unpack there. I wonder if Jenifer has an aspect or Dan has an aspect they want to dip in on. Otherwise, I can do a direct.
Sure.
You want to go for it, Dan?
Okay, sure. Yeah. No, I mean, this is, I think the big question for me is sort of, that the move towards young people becoming more and more independent, less and less democratic, but still kind of holding a rough set of issue positions and having rough salience that sort of lines up with the Democratic Party. For the most part, that hasn't shifted. That's been a little more static, I feel like, but the party ID has plummeted, right? Like there's like we've been talking over a couple of weeks about the voter registration numbers. I think Nevada is probably the starkest example where NPA is a sort of prominent option that they have, on their voter reg forms.
It's the automatic voter reg.
Automatic voter reg, and then it's like sort of automatically sort of puts you into no party affiliation unless you change it. And I guess that is the big question, and this sort of maybe ties into your book too a little bit. It's like these long-term trends of like cycle over cycle, 10, 5 or 10 cycles in a row, right? That decay it seems like a big problem, and I guess my fear is that in the scenario you laid out, where a lot of those people are going to come home, I feel like what happened, and I don't know if you got a chance to dig back into any of our previous episodes or look at the Skippers research that we did of the people who voted. We did a bunch of focus groups on a big poll of people who voted for Biden in 2020 and then didn't vote in 2024, and it seems like that dynamic has kind of held up, and like you said, until this cycle, and when it kind of didn't. And we're still trying to pull that. We got some really clear signals out of that research, but we're still trying to pull that apart. And for sure, the big question I think that everybody's asking is like, how do we turn this around? And that that dynamic of like, well, they're indies, but they're kind of with us, doesn't seem to be holding up anymore. And that seems like the gazillion-dollar question right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I'd say. The first is that while 2024 was not a high point for the Democrats, You've probably seen the new Gallup numbers, which suggest that, Gallup tracks regularly party identification, that Democrats have now rebounded to some extent. I think that the best motivation for the Democratic Party, the best engine for Democratic Party support over the course of the past 10 years has consistently been Donald Trump, who, as you are all probably aware, is now president again. And this is having a net positive effect, I think, on the party. The other thing that I would say is that looking at the data, the biggest swings that we saw between 2020 and 2024 among young people were, according to the numbers that I have seen and looked at, were primarily among non-white voters. Now, non-white voters make up a substantially larger portion of the young population than the older population. Again, this all is in the book, but this is because immigration was restricted during the time when the baby boom was emergent and so on and so forth. But the older Americans tend to be whiter. Younger Americans are more likely to be Black, Hispanic, Asian. And it was those non-white young people who are more likely to have shifted to the right. And that suggests all sorts of possible theories. It's, the caveat that applies then is if we're talking about the massive advantage that Democrats have among older Black Americans, for example, that even if there is a shift among younger Black Americans, there's still a huge Democratic advantage. It is just not as massive as it is among older Black Americans, right? So we see those sorts of dynamics emerge, but it also suggests there may be some social structure, some social issues at play here. So one theory that I've heard, which I am responsive to, and I think makes sense, although I don't think the data is there yet, is that younger Black Americans are less likely to participate in church. All right, they're less likely to go and be part of the church community, where there's a lot of that sort of social normalization around being supportive of Democratic candidates. So there's a complexity here, I think, that often gets overlooked. It certainly is the case, I think, that when we talk about the shift among younger voters, that it's often overlooked that there was disproportionately among younger voters who are not white. There's all this conversation about the Rogan Bros, which I think is heavily, if not always explicitly, centered on young white men. And I don't think that's necessarily the most important story for the party. But to your broader point, yes, I mean, this is a situation in which, while it has long been the case that young men are not as liberal on policy issues as are young women, that they have broadly aligned with the left for the past 21 years, since 2004 largely, that is not something the Democratic Party should have felt as reliant on as it has become reliant on. But it also is not the case that those young men are now going to be voting yes on fascism for the next 4 years. Like that's also not necessarily the case.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say, in all the qual that we've done, I think that one of the signals that is the loudest around this group that you're talking about is the feeling that they don't know what the Democratic Party has delivered to them. Like, they just don't think, I mean, they still to this day don't think Biden did anything while he was president. They don't see Democrats delivering to help their lives. And that's partially a policy problem, but it's really a lot of a communication problem, because Biden did get a lot done, but it wasn't communicated out to these people in a way that they could hear at the time, et cetera. But the other thing is just that they don't see Democrats fighting for them. They don't see them standing up, opposing Trump enough. This, like you're saying about the way the partisanship is changing, they're becoming less partisan in their party identification, but they're becoming more polarized in terms of like how they feel about Trump. And so how do we actually deal with that when we have a party leadership that kind of from the beginning of Trump being elected in 24, took a lot of effort to get them to actually stand up and fight him in the way that the party faithful wanted, or the rank and file really wanted them to. And I think that's why when you brought up Mamdani and AOC, it's like, it's more about their posture as fighters and how, yes, they're outsiders, but they're saying, I'm going to fight for you for these things that really matter to you in your life. And they're not afraid to fight whatever, if it's Trump or their own party leadership that's standing in the way.
Yeah, but that's inextricable from the fact that they're outside of the Democratic Party establishment, right? AOC and Sanders went on this tour and were saying, let's do these things. And they were unhindered by the fact that the party was saying, let's be cautious, let's figure this out, which was stupid. The party needs to embrace, jumping into this more than they clearly are. But AOC and Sanders weren't hindered by that. They didn't feel as though they had an obligation to be like, hey, Chuck Schumer, what do you think? Should we do this thing? They're just like, the hell with it, and we're going to go do it. So I think that I agree with what you're saying. I think too that you're right that young people don't necessarily know what's going on. I think that the Democratic Party has been burned my entire life on the idea that all they need to do is talk to young people more, and then the young people will understand more and be more likely to vote. It's just young people don't pay attention to politics. Young people don't vote, and God bless them. I think we're all old enough now to be like, God, I wish I could. Yeah, I mean, come on, like relative to the rest of the population, it's just they simply don't, right? They're like, yes, of course there are pockets, but relative to the population on the whole, they don't. And I don't, no one has ever cracked that.
Yeah, one of the things I would just add is that I don't disagree with you in some ways, but I will say that, like, a lot of the people that we have studied have been these folks that voted for Joe Biden in 2020, but didn't show up in 2024, right? And so, these, like, their absence and this is true among young people too, their absence in the electorate sort of punctuated the idea that, that there were huge gains, and there were gains. Absolutely. Sure. Republicans made gains, but it also distorted the sort of whole electorate overall, because there was an absence of these millions of voters, roughly 15 million voters. Right. So, I think that's one thing. We found that actually in our qual, a fair amount of the young people actually were paying attention. I mean, it was wild. I think this was an unusual, like, Dan,
this is why I was making.
Yeah, go ahead, Dan. Take it away. Go ahead.
Right. No, you got it. This is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, we always go back to this one woman, but I was so struck by her. She was a young woman from Wisconsin. She was, I think she was mixed race. Like, she went to a Harris. I mean, this is just emblematic of something that we found, but she went to a Harris rally and then listened and then left partway through. And like, I just didn't hear, I left like early because I didn't hear any policies or anything that really like spoke to me. So, there were a number of those young people we talked to who were actually paying some attention and just weren't persuaded. So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, yes. Right. I mean, we recognize what focus groups are for, right? Like, focus groups are not representative. Like I get it. And, the people who opt to participate in a focus group are, I think, almost necessarily going to be people who are more engaged in these sorts of things than other people. I mean, to your other point about the difference between 2020 and 2024, I think one of the challenges that we've seen is that people are treating 2024 as the aberration when really 2020 was the aberration. We saw this huge surge in turnout, including a lot of young people. There are lots of reasons for that. It was easier to vote. COVID was going on. There wasn't as much going on. People were paying a lot more attention to what was happening. The George Floyd protests got people, activated and engaged. One of the things that I did is I went back and looked at the comparison between 2024 and 2016. And Donald Trump, we saw this big shift to the left in 2020 and a shift back to the right in 2024. And the difference between 16 and 2024 in states is really pretty small, right? 2024 looks basically like 2016 to a large extent. Now, Absolutely, it's the case that people had been informed of 8 more years of what Donald Trump was and what he was going to do. And one might have expected a different result because of that. That's totally fair to say. But, when we talk about the drop between 2020 and 2024, that is less, I think, a function of 2024 than it is 2020.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, Jen, do you want to jump in on that, or should I? Because I did want to interrogate one other thing that.
No, go for it.
Well, well, I think this is really true. And I want to just get to the bottom of it. Something you mentioned was that there's this, that one of the things that turned up in the, one of the things that turned up in this Fox News poll was that Democrats in particular and Republicans in particular felt like their own party, like Republicans felt like their own party had a plan to deal with things, right? And Democrats, that's in this moment, and it's in the Fox News poll, and that Democrats viewed their own party as not having a plan. So I just wondered, like, they're less likely to have a plan. I have this somewhere in my notes here.
Like 79% of GOP voters say their party has a plan, while 51%, that's pretty significant, of Democrats say their own party. I mean, I found that kind of shocking on some level. It's like only 51% of the entire Democratic Party voter population thinks that their own party has a plan. Like, I find that shocking. Sorry.
Yeah, except I bet you don't, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm not
because
sure
what's the
I know
Democratic plan?
what the Dems plan is.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
You know,
It
Okay.
might be
but I
just in
think
the
we
book.
all also recognize that it's not hard to change that if you're willing to engage in the sort of, you know, if you're willing to sort of jump into it in the way the Democrats have been weirdly reticent to do. And so, you know, I did not find it terribly surprising, in the same way that you did find it surprising, which is just that, like, I understand, you know, we both understand this is the environment in which we exist.
For sure. I am not actually shocked, but I mean,
Yeah.
on some level, it is kind of crazy that that's where we are, because I also feel like, I think we do have a plan, but we've talked about, like, when you look at the party platform, for example. I was recently looking back at the party platform from 2020 when there was that whole process with the Hillary people and the Bernie people getting together. And when you go back and look at that plan, I mean, it's a lot of things, but it's like good stuff. I mean, it's a lot of policies that should pass and that I think we all would support. It's not communicated in a clear enough way, like we saw with Mom Donnie in New York, where it's like free buses, you know, like faster things, like cheaper rent. Like, it wasn't communicated that way. But I don't know why that plan just got thrown out the window. I mean, it's a good plan. The next iteration with Biden in 24 was much weaker. When I went and looked at it, and Kamala, it ended up being just like more watered down, a little bit. It was a little bit more centrist, in my opinion, and it didn't come across as strong. But I do find it interesting, because I was recently on talking with some other activists, and kind of like that came across, where people are like, we don't have an agenda. Like, even people who do this every day think that. But then I feel like we kind of do have an agenda. So what really is stopping us from getting that clarity? I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I would point to the message in 2024 that was sort of the closing / tail end message, which was not about policy as much as it was about the threat of Donald Trump, right?
Right.
And, you know, it was totally valid. You know, like, no one at this point can go back and look at that and be like, well, why were the Democrats saying Trump was going to do these things? Like, well, because Trump is going to do these things and has done these things, right? The challenge, I think, was twofold. The first is that Donald Trump did an extremely good job of spinning all of this stuff into, they're just out to get me because they're out to get you. He was just extremely good at that from his indictments on down. And, you know, taking advantage of the low information voter population that's out there, you know, very, very effectively. It's something he's extremely good at. But then second, because it was hard for Democrats even then to point to things that had happened. Yes, I mean, you can point to the infrastructure bill, right? But from a practical standpoint, a lot of people aren't paying attention to the eventual disbursement of funds in their neighborhoods. And so, you know, like, it was hard for Democrats to say, here's what we've done. I was just, you know, part of my saying this is colored by having just seen an interview with Ta-Nehisi Coates, in which he's sitting on stage and he's just like, you know, since basically Bill Clinton, or even, you know, before then, what have the Democrats actually provided, right? Like, what has gotten done? And, you know, he points to things like the Affordable Care Act as being something that's demonstrable, but also extremely hard for Democrats to defend. And it keeps getting eroded and eaten away. And we've lost the Supreme Court and yada, 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 all these things that he articulated. And I think that's a common sentiment, that the party has not been able to get anything done. And I think, you know, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and I think what's underappreciated by the general public is the extent to which that's in large part because of massive and unprecedented obstruction from the right? Like, you know, the Mitch McConnell dragging his heels on literally everything from 2010 on played a significant role in that. But that said, it still is the case that voters coming in 2024 saw prices go up, which was a huge factor that I think, you know, we talk about a lot, but it still is just underappreciated as a factor. The fact that Democrats couldn't necessarily point to anything besides this vague infrastructure bill. People were still feeling irritated about COVID and blaming Biden for that, even though it obviously started under Trump. And, you know, prices going up, and, you know, those things combined, and then Donald Trump being like, we're all going to break it all. And, you know, really tapping into this sentiment, which has become popular, that's very anti-institutional and almost anti-American, right? Just this to hell with it. We're going to throw it all out, and we're just going to, you know, we're going to break everything and make something new. And there is a directness that I think appeals to a lot of people, even though they aren't appreciating the extent to which that plan is extremely fraught and going to make a lot of people's lives worse.
I just say I have to this difference between Jen, like, spending her time meticulously going through the platforms and all the things that Democrats could do. And 2016 was really better than 2020. And like what Republicans are basically doing is saying, how can we break things? And then who can we blame for it being broken? Like, I mean, that is really what, like the difference between Jen sifting through policies that could actually give real change in people's lives and this other very basic formula of like breaking things and naming villains is a clear narrative advantage, something Dan's done a lot of thinking on.
Yeah, so this is Kerry. This is reminding me of one of the questions that I'm curious what Philip's response to this would be. We felt like one of the things that didn't come through in the combined Biden-Harris confusing campaign was a clear story about sort of like why things are broken in this country. And we've now tested this a couple different ways in a couple of different polls and even in a little qual too. And we said there was like, do you feel like it was a forced choice? Do you think the problem is more like we have a system that has let the top, the very richest take 79 trillion from the rest of us? Because there was this RAND study that went through and calculated how much we would have had if we hadn't done trickle down economics, basically. And it comes out to, it was 50 trillion in 2020. Now it's 79 trillion, right? They recalculated it. So we said, is that the problem, or is the problem, government workers and
government spending
and immigrants and trans kids, right? And we've phrased it a couple different ways. And like one of the ways that we phrased it, we did a general, like an all voters survey that was just through Pollfish, but it was like 35% of or 34% of Trump Republicans or of Trump voters agreed with that, right? And we asked it of the skippers, and it was like, I think like Biden skippers under 30, it was like 78-11, right? So there's like total overwhelming agreement with this. But like even reading that, when I think about that question, I'm like, I'm not totally sure what Kamala Harris's answer to that question would be. Like, I'm certainly not sure what her campaign was trying to say and sort of how they thought about that. And in terms of going forward, it's like, I don't know even that Dems need to say that or run on it, but it would help. It seems like, at least particularly with some of these, with the audiences that they're really struggling with, the young people.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's certainly true, and I think that one of the reasons that the Epstein stuff has landed with the force that it has is because it puts Donald Trump irrevocably on the side of the rich elites, right? And he's done a very good job of positioning himself as part of the people against the elites. He can't do that here, right? For a variety of reasons, including that he was, pals with Jeff Epstein. But you're absolutely right. I think the challenge that the party has, and the party as opposed to people who are left-leaning like AOC and Sanders, who obviously are very effective at running on this issue. The problem the party has is, I think there are a few layers to it. One is that a lot of the party leaders have some wealth and feel some sympathy toward the wealthy that I think is unhelpful. The fact that they aren't just like, to hell with it, ban stock trading for members of Congress, which is not actually a real significant problem. Like, I don't think that, this is actually something that leads to corruption the way that people interpret it, but there's no reason not to embrace it, right? Like, it's an extremely popular position. You could run on it, but they're loath to do so. But then I think it's just that the party is so navel-gazing, right? Like, look, I like Derek Thompson. I consider him a friend, but I think abundance is just extremely poorly timed. Like, no one gives a shit about housing and zoning stuff right now. Like, what are you talking about? Like I get that the book was written, and if Harris had been president, then, they have a platform which they can pressure people. I totally understand that. And again, much respect to them for doing it. But in this moment, the debate the party doesn't need to have is about like what zoning rules look like at the municipal level. No one cares about that right now, given what's going on. And that the fact that there is so much going on and it's driven by literally a billionaire working with another billionaire, putting billionaires in his cabinet, making tons of money off the presidency. The fact that the party can't use this as a moment to make class warfare arguments is pretty astonishing.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do we fix that? Like, a lot
Your
of
job, man.
people,
My job is
No, we're all in this together.
I
I'm
just
just, wait,
think it's like admitting you have a problem is the first step, right? And I literally think that's it. Like, I think we actually have to confront that we are in fact the problem, and we have
Democrats Anonymous.
it's
Yeah,
very
we're
Taylor Swift, you know.
I mean, I will say, I feel like it's my job to say here that if you want a takedown of abundance that is very Texas focused and very uniquely way to win President Torrey Gavito, you can go to the Substack right now, which is also called Charting the Way Forward. And she has a very Texas-based look at what an abundance agenda has really done, has really the damage it's really reaped for Texans and where they stand there now. So I'm just saying, if you're looking for some abundance reading that is very, very pertinent to this very moment, please go to Charting the Way Forward Substack and check it out. I don't have a good answer for how to fix it. I mean, I do have other questions, but no.
We can put that in the bike rack for a second. That's the big question.
All right. So here's going back to something else. I mean, we were talking about Democrats not, a lot of Democratic voters feeling like their party doesn't have a plan, right? I mean, only 51% saying that the party does have a plan. There's also been some discussion that Democratic voters are really in a different place than they were during Trump's first term. There's Gallup data showing a 7-point uptick in Democrats who now identify as very liberal. There's also Pew data showing that in 2017, 4 in 10 Democrats thought the party was doing too little to work with Trump. In other words, they wanted more sort of, across the aisle reaching. But now 73% of Democratic voters say Democrats aren't doing enough to oppose Trump. So I'd be curious what all three of you think. I mean, is this disconnect between the party's rank and file and its leadership what's hobbling the Democratic Party? Is it worse, bigger than that? Thoughts?
Yes, that's what it is. I mean, that's it. Yeah, 100%. And you have these DC folks who are like, well, according to the bylaws, we can't do this. Robert's rules insist, and it's just like the Jamel Bowie makes this point regularly, which I think is totally valid. Like, where are the ambitious people? Like, why is it that why are AOC and Sanders the only ambitious people in Washington? Like, why don't you? I mean, like Booker, when he gave that long speech, was something. Right? Didn't do a lot, right? But it was something. It was something, and then of course he tried to like make money off it, which, like fundraise and so on and so forth, which I think was not really in keeping with the spirit of the thing. But like, do something, right? And it's not just hearings. It's like getting engaged, and it's not being timid about it, and it's not thinking that you are smarter than the electorate and you're gonna figure out how to do it. So anyway, yes, the answer is yes. And then, I don't have data for that, but to hell with it. The answer is yes.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a lot of data, and your instincts are what we're looking for here, right? We have tried to take this approach also of grounding our analysis in looking at every, we've run. I mean, I want to brag. I always brag. The Way to Win has run 7 studies since the election that I think are some of the best research that's out there. We're going to put out a summary again, coming soon on our Substack. Another plug. We're going to put out a summary of these that sort of, at least we'll link out to them. If the party can't, no, sorry, go ahead, Jenifer.
No, go ahead.
Okay, right. It's something's going to give here at some point, or I guess just Dems are going to lose. There's got to be a path forward here to shift these things, and I'm almost wondering if events may sort of overtake this too. There's we were just this morning looking at Roy Cooper's launch video, which is a really interesting little artifact, and I didn't pull the YouTube downloader thing that I usually use is busted, but we were maybe going to watch it because he hits affordability really hard early on, and then he links it to inequality too, which is a thing that we tried an ad like this, and we've been talking about this a little bit. That look, the rich are taking all the money, that's why everything costs more. Very Mamdani-esque, which is kind of what I was wondering. People are like, oh, Mamdani's in New York, whatever. I was like, well, if there was an older white guy who could kind of sell this and talk about how he preyed on it, boom, right? There's Roy Cooper, right? And we'll see how this goes. The big question, it seems to me now, is there's a lot of agreement around that. And then there's this like school of thought in the party still that is saying, you know, we need to, I'm trying to remember what the phrase was, you know, adopt the grievances of the Trump and MAGA voters as a path to connecting with these people. And this is like the argument that like Tim Miller's making on the Bulwark kind of over and over, and other people are making this. And like, I'm just wondering how that lands with you. And like, because and Jenifer and I were watching, this is sort of related to it. We were watching this video, and he doesn't really, he talks about working with Republicans, but he never says those things were right-wing ideas and Republican ideas, and that's why things were broken.
Right. And then he talks about all the things that MAGA is doing right now, but he says politicians in Washington are
and not Republicans, right?
And
that's
not
where
Republicans.
they can't, you know, right. And I think it's because they think they need those votes, but rather than just saying those things are bad ideas and led to bad outcomes and are doing the things that you don't want, they have this weird kind of dance that they're doing still.
Yeah, well, I
don't know quite as effective as it is.
Yeah, a few things. The first is that video obviously is not the sum total of his campaign, so it'll be interesting to see how he does the campaign, right? So, like, we all acknowledge that. The second thing is that, you know, the entire point of the piece that you saw that led to your inviting me on was that people should be running against the party, right? That you should be taking a stand, which is the Democratic Party. I'm a member of it, but it's broken and we need a new way forward, right? And, you know, not necessarily just because they feel like they want the party not to be successful, but A, to put pressure on the party to do better, and B, because that builds the distance between themselves and the unpopular party that I think is going to be useful to Democrats, right? And I think that's going to continue to be useful to Democrats for the long term. Because this is the trend, right? The trend that we've seen is a move away from parties toward partisanship, as Julia Azari has put it in the past. And, you know, that the Democratic Party as an institution needs to evolve the way that it deploys its institutional power on behalf of Democrats. And that means giving them the space to be critical of the party and to be critical of elites, which gets to your point, which is, you know, how does the party need to extend an olive branch to the MAGA people that hate the elites? And I think the answer is yes, but you just need to frame it through the lens probably of economic class in the way that was discussed, right? You shouldn't be, Democrats should not be losing union voters, right? But they are shedding union voters, if not losing them outright. The other thing I'll say that sort of gets lost in this is, you know, after the 2004 election, Democrats expected to win. They expected George W. Bush to lose. You know, he was running on a slate of policies that were not terribly popular. And it seemed to many Democrats as though it heralded this new wave of Republican dominance forever, right? And then you had Barack Obama emerge, and that wasn't the case. And I think that it is underappreciated the extent to which there can be a Democrat who emerges, who is someone who is at a distance from the party and who is able to make a compelling message that gets a lot of Americans involved, you know, and we've seen this happen lots of times. We've seen it happen. We saw John Kennedy, we saw Bill Clinton, like we've seen charismatic Democrats emerge from unexpected places and unexpected backgrounds. And all of a sudden the fortunes shift. Now, look, it's absolutely the case that the United States is in a much more dire position than it was in 2008 or 1960 or 1992. The United States is in a very, very fraught position. And, you know, none of us can take for granted that the way in which Americans have selected elected leaders is going to progress as we have come to expect that, you know, those elections to progress. We can't take that for granted. I don't think, you know, that we can't rely on elections now or in the future, but I do think that it is worrisome. But that said, Democrats have been in the wilderness before, to the extent that Democrats in disarray is a catchphrase, right? Like we've seen this play out. And one thing that it takes is time. And another thing that it takes is stumbling onto something that works. And I would remind people that Donald Trump himself, who is seen as, you know, not by the left in a positive light, but is seen, I think, generally as someone who has figured out how to make politics work in the way that he wants it to. But one thing that he does is he tries a lot of garbage and then he seizes upon the things that work. You know, part of that's just lying. He lies all the time and some of the lies catch on. He seizes on those lies and repeats the lies. And, you know, he uses campaign rallies as focus grouping, essentially, right, to see what sort of response. It's like dial testing. Like that's what he does at his rallies. And he's able to successfully hone in on messages because he's not afraid of saying things that are false. And he's not afraid of you know, leaning into fascistic language and authoritarian language. And it certainly isn't the case that Democrats can do that. But Democrats do need to try stuff. And they need to not be afraid of trying stuff. And they need their leaders to not be afraid of trying stuff. And I think that's the tension and that's the challenge that the parties is having at the moment.
Yeah. That this this sort of, I love this, that this came up, and it's so great hearing that from someone else, because this is sort of the core of why we exist and why we're doing this. We felt like we've been sort of speed running like the decades of advantage that the Republicans have in persuasion and media. And we're trying to get more politicians to come on our show, where we're friendly, we're pro-Democrat. Like, we want the Democrats to succeed. We also think they really need to change, right? But we want them to be able to come on here and to have honest conversations, not with, nobody can come on here and expect to have, preset questions, right? Like, this is like a free.
Well, you sent me that list of things you said.
We sent you. We sent you a dummy list. It was a dummy list.
That's true. It was mostly about baseball, which I found strange.
So we have to we're trying to sort of shift this culture. Shift this culture. One of the things that we do is also research, right? We make tons of ads and test them, which tells you something too.
I mean, I think the thing that I'm stuck on, and I think you talked about this in your piece too, you were kind of like, can they do it? And if they can't, then we're going to have to run against it. But I think we're still in a mode of like, can we rehab the brand from the bottom up? Like, it's not going to happen from the people who are in charge now. There does have to be some kind of shift, some kind of shakeup, some, generational stepping down and, change. But it does feel like I'm not ready. I understand that it's helpful to run against the brand, and I don't like running against the brand, because I just feel like, how is that actually helping? Maybe it's helping in the short term, but like eventually, how are we ever going to get a durable governing majority if we're not going to actually try to rehab the brand or something where we take it over? I guess I want to understand that a bit better.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly the point, right? My argument is, and this is mostly just instinct, but my argument is that what has to happen is the next leader of the Democratic Party has to run against the Democratic Party, then become the head of the Democratic Party, and then the Democratic Party can effectively say that it has changed, right? So Donald Trump consumed the Republican Party. He stripped it to the to the threads, and has taken all of its power for himself. That's not obviously what the Democrats want to do, and the Republican Party is in real trouble once Donald Trump is out of office, because he has stripped all the power out of it and taken it for himself. And I think people underappreciate that. He's stripped its ability to run campaigns. He's stripped its ability to run primaries. All of that's going to be gone and have to be rebuilt when Donald Trump's out of power, which I think is to the Democrats' advantage. But I think whoever becomes the next leader of the Democratic Party is going to do so from outside of the Democratic Party, although not necessarily officially, but by presenting themselves as an outsider. It's going to take over the Democratic Party and be able to present a new face of the Democratic Party, a new Democratic Party. It may be that it looks very little like the old Democratic Party. It may be that it shifts in a way that makes older Democrats feel uncomfortable and Democratic leaders feel uncomfortable. But I think that's the necessary evolution. And I mean necessary in the sense of, like, in order to be effective and win, that's going to have to happen. And I think that's probably, I've said before that my guess is that the Democratic nominee in 2028 is not someone who, gets there by showing up at pancake dinners in New Hampshire and going to, Clyburn's thing in South Carolina, but it's somebody who comes from the outside and runs in a new and unusual way, sort of in the way that Barack Obama took over the establishment in 2008.
I will say,
can I just jump in with a quick thing? There was also, I keep wondering about some kind of House leadership decapitation primary, right? Like an Eric Cantor kind of situation, like Dave Bratt, right? And I forget what year that was.
Which is sort of what AOC did, right?
But you're talking about like
leadership, right?
Leadership.
I mean, I guess it was 2014. Right.
You're talking about, like,
but those things might sort of interact too. Like there's maybe that needs to happen before the presidential, or vice versa. I don't know.
Right. I mean, Jeffries and Schumer are both doing a poor job at this moment. I think it's safe.
Well, AOC could run for Schumer's seat. That's a possibility.
Sure.
I mean, that's like one avenue, right?
Or she can run for president.
Yeah, she wouldn't.
Yeah, or she could run for president. Yeah, I'm not. I mean, clearly that's up to her. I'm not gonna. Sure. I will say that Roy Cooper's short-term, solve for this problem to some extent is just in the midterms. Is at one point he says, in his introduction video, I never wanted to go to Washington, which is a believable thing for him. Like, he's not necessarily dissing the party, but he's saying, like, Washington is, seedy. I didn't want to go there, but the times kind of demand it. And I mean, it's believable given his bio to some extent, because he's stayed local in North Carolina for most of it, right? So
Sure. I mean, the tricky thing about this is we're going to hear this a lot from Democrats, I'm sure, right? We always have. We've tracked this in TV Congress too. Part of the problem of running against Washington is we also at some point need to make the case for government, right? Like in
sure.
Mamdani's message, he's like, this is for people who government, who this campaign is for people who believe that government's job is to actually solve problems and do things for us, right?
Yeah.
So it's like all of the running, and this is the double-edged sword of running and corruption. And I think why we really need to get the Democrats to say Republican corruption, the words that they do not want to say together, right? They need to say Republican corruption, not just corruption. Then they would that's something that needs to be like a little more, needs to be tightened up a little bit.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. I forgot to say about Roy Cooper, where it's not like what you're saying, Philip, where you're like, someone's running against the party, like I'm an outsider, but he's more just like, he's like ignoring it, he's more just like, he's like maybe running away from it, but not like actually challenging it. So I just don't think that lands for people who are looking for more of that kind of outsider energy. It seems like it's directed more toward like, I'm trying not to scare these middle of the road or Republican people, right? By not actually calling out the Republicans for what they're doing or saying when I watched that, I was like, some voters are not even going to know he's a Democrat when they're watching it. So that's
in North Carolina. Yeah. Right.
Right. Because North Carolina.
Yeah. I think that this gets to two dangerous areas for the Democrats. One is the one that was just described about how you don't want people to think government is so broken and so corrupt that it can't do anything. And I think Democrats need to do a good job of differentiating between Washington in the Trump light and Washington and what it can be. And I think they have a good opportunity to do that, which is to point at a lot of the programs and the funding that have been cut as this is what we want to have happen. These are good things, and these are the good outcomes we saw from it. And Donald Trump's ripping that apart. I think that's fairly easy to thread, a fairly easy needle to thread. I do think there's some challenge with the Epstein stuff that you also don't want to stoke these wild conspiracy theories, right? And you do want to continue to be the party that is like rooted in reality. And I think that's going to be harder to do as time passes, just because reality is becoming so distorted in basically every lens of American life. But I do think that, one of the things that I have said in the past is that while I recognize the political advantage that arises with Epstein, I do think the party has to be careful not to be like, yeah, he probably was killed in that jail cell. And, there is this list in these videos, like all that sort of stuff is going into Trumpian terrain. And I think in a way that I think damages the party over the long term, even if it feels advantageous in the moment.
Yeah.
Okay. I get that.
Yeah, I do. I think rooting the party in reality is harder to do. I mean, to win over people and be the party rooted in reality is harder to do as a concept than if you have a charismatic leader who is rooted in reality, and then it trickles down from them, right?
But I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but think about when Harris first became the nominee. I really did think it was very effective to be like, these guys are weirdos, right? Like that seemed effective because it's like you're just divergent from like everyday American lives. And I don't know if that would have been more effective because I do think the election came down primarily to prices, but it definitely seemed to me to be a better way of dealing with the way that Donald Trump approached the world than simply saying like, this is my competition and I need to beat him in fair electoral. Sorry to interrupt.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, I think that's true, right? The party leader, if they're charismatic enough and capture the ear of the people, then can help confer some reality, inject some reality back into the conversation, right? I think, I was going to end one place, and Jen, you can overrule me and we can do this afterwards, but I did wonder, like, sometimes sometimes a charismatic leader comes out of a moment that we don't expect. And there is this thing happening with the Texas legislator. It's what our last episode was on, the legislature, the Republican power grab there. I do wonder if this could be a galvanizing moment where Democrats can reestablish themselves as fighters. I mean, I've been interested to see Like they are, they have captured some headlines here over the past week in a situation where it can be difficult to capture headlines. And the Texas Democrats, the state House Democrats, they're leaving so that they, put a little bit, at least create some time and space to get the nation focused on what Republicans are trying to do in Texas to squeeze out, 5 more seats for themselves, because Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans have basically, have a toxic agenda that no one likes. They're trying to insulate themselves, right? So like, I just wonder, is this a potential galvanizing moment, or do you feel like it doesn't have legs? I'm not sure.
Oh, I mean,
anyone?
I would just say that
no.
The number of times that Democrats have been like, well, maybe Texas is the answer, right? Like, how many times have you heard that?
They're not getting very good coverage. The New York Times is like, why are these people leaving? So
it's like, that's the other side. It's very easy to spin negatively, but I mean, who knows? Who knows? Doing something is better than doing nothing, and doing something gives you attention. So who knows? But I would say that Texas has not proven to be the boon for Democrats that Democrats have hoped for the past 250 years.
Well, I don't think we're suddenly gonna win in Texas. Like, I don't think we're suddenly gonna take all 5 of those seats.
Sure.
I'm just wondering if it's a moment to focus the nation's mind on what a bunch of cheaters the Republicans are. That's all.
Maybe
not.
I thought you were asking, are there leaders that are in that fight that are coming out, which there definitely are. And I mean, just to say, this is the Way to Win podcast, and we have been working on Texas for the whole time we've been in existence, and our President Tory is a 7th generation Texan. So like, we're in it, we're deep in it. We're in it. We're not giving up. Texas is, it's like Lucy with the football, but it is a place we have to keep fighting for. So, but I am interested in some of the leadership. Like, I think that James Tallarico is definitely having a moment. I mean, he's someone who we've known also like forever and have been close with him. A lot of people on our team know him very well. But he was like not known at all. I mean, I don't think anyone would have known who he was, before this happened. And then all of a sudden he's on Joe Rogan, he's on the late shows. He was just on something else that people were talking about. What was it? One of the crazy things, not Rogan, one of the other big ones. Anyway, he's like everywhere and he's doing really well. And I just think your point is taken a little bit, Kerry, that like we couldn't have necessarily predicted this happening in Texas the way it is with the redistricting fight, but it has like catapulted at least James Tallarico as one local leader to a national stage. And he could be, I mean, he does have a lot of promise just in terms of a new kind of leader for the party who can just talk normally, who can talk for 3 hours, who isn't like doing talking points, only. Yes. Sorry.
Can I just say, I left the Washington Post 2 weeks ago. I've been paying less attention to the news. I've never seen this person in my life.
Yeah.
And I pay a lot of attention to politics. So I would also be cautious about, coming to assumptions this quickly as this thing.
Oh, you've never even seen him right now, even now?
No, I have no idea who you're talking about.
But
really?
This
interesting.
But this is a difference between mainstream, and this is not but you're talking about reading a lot of mainstream politics, and we're talking about him spending 3 hours on Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Really fair.
Yeah.
No, I guess because also being plugged into the internet, right? Like we're plugged into the internet, and everybody on the internet is talking about James Tallarico. So it is interesting how those bubbles. This is a real life example. I love that.
Real life example. All right, maybe we can sneak in towards the end here. One last thing, which is, at the end of your piece, your conclusion, Philip, was that, quote, a Democratic Party that effectively cajoles voters into centering specific issues in their electoral decision-making is a party that is perceived as having a clear plan and a party that wins elections, right? Mm-hmm. So can you tease that out just a little bit, and then maybe Jenifer and Dan can kind of weigh in on it.
Yeah, I'll note that I just Googled this Tallarico and his face does look familiar, but he also looks like the bad guy in a movie that I can't quite place. Okay, so that said, yeah, I mean, basically the conclusion of the piece is, hey, Democratic Party, stand for something, stand up, use your voices, and don't be afraid to do it. And it's super easy for me to say that, and I recognize that. But there has traditionally been, the Democratic Party has traditionally been like, let's look at the polls, see what the polls say, and figure out our move. And I think that what we've seen in the past decade is that by jumping into it and figuring it out on the fly and making mistakes, that you're able to have success politically in a way that I think is sort of antithetical to the Democrats. And I have a huge theory about this, which is that, like the Democratic Party is run by kids that were really good in college. And so they, they treat everything like a freaking seminar class. Right. And I think that's detrimental. And I think that there needs to be more emotion, more gut reaction for the Democratic Party to be able to be successful. But that's really what the case is. The case is just like, hey, try it. Just try it. Try and do more and be more vocal and let everyone do whatever they're doing. And someone's going to miss and someone's not. And look, you're getting pilloried over Sydney Sweeney's ad, which no one has said anything about. You're going to get pilloried anyway. You might as well throw some punches as you're going.
Yeah. Love that.
Totally agree. Yeah.
All right. You guys want to add anything before we close it out?
Philip has been super generous with his time. I know he's got to run. I think we should probably.
Although I'm now, I saw that guy's face and I'm trying to place the movie.
Does it look like James? I mean, does he look like James Franco to you?
I will. No, it's just like, it's some old movie. It's I think it's a Hitchcock or like some spy movie.
Oh,
it's just
really
weird.
old.
I don't know what it is. It's going to drive me nuts. And when I
you can email us when you figure it out.
That's right. If you can get in contact. And if anyone's listening and wondering, we can maybe include it in the thread when we send out the Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, let's leave it there. I just want to thank Philip and Jenifer and Dan for an interesting, probing conversation. Philip, where can people find you?
pbump.net's the easiest for now. Yeah.
pbump.net.
PBUMP, like my first initial last name .net. Yeah. Or .com, same thing.
Okay. Great. Sounds good.
Good.
And thanks to the listeners. Remember, recruit and review. This is, we do this ad free. It's fantastic. So come give us a good review, and there you go. And our listenership is growing steadily every month. So let's keep that trend going. As I've said, check out our Substack. We've got some new stuff up there from Way to Win President Tori Gavito. And with that, we will see you next Thursday. Until then, do good, be well, hug your loved ones, and please tell your dog I say hi.